Hello everyone, Mr. Lipchick here, and our topic of discussion for this segment of instruction will be budget deficits and the national debt. Okay, balancing the budget. A balanced budget is defined as a budget in which revenues are equal to spending. In reality, the budget is almost never balanced and usually has a surplus or a deficit. The budget is so huge that this is really impossible to do. A budget surplus is a situation in which the government takes in more than it spends. And a budget deficit is a situation in which the government spends more than it takes in. Neither of these situations are good if they are an extreme situation, but usually it is not very harmful if it's at a smaller or lower level. So deficits can occur due to circumstances beyond our control, such as a recession or other unforeseen events. When the government runs a deficit, it did not take in enough revenue to cover the expenses for the year. The government can respond in one of two ways. It can create money, through the Federal Reserve, or it can borrow money through the issuance of bonds. Creating money. The government can create new money to pay its workers and benefits for the citizens. It has the authority to do so, as it is the issuer of currency for the entire nation. The money is created electronically today. They no longer, print it out as they did at one time. And this works well for small deficits, however, but not for large ones. Larger deficits are a greater problem. When the government puts more money into circulation, it creates more demand and output. And once the economy reaches full employment, however, the output cannot increase. And this leaves more dollars, but the same amount of goods and services, which we all know leads to inflation. Prices rise so that more money will be needed to purchase the same amount of goods and services. And a country that tries to do this, to cover very large deficits, will experience what is known as hyperinflation, which is, for instance, within a short period of time, your income stays the same, but it costs 5 times as much to buy a gallon of milk. That would be an example of hyperinflation. Borrowing money. The government borrows money by selling bonds, which are bought by consumers and businesses. Savings bonds, basically. The government may also sell treasury bills, treasury notes, and treasury bonds. These have higher rates of return, but usually they cannot be purchased in small denominations and they take longer to mature. So responsible borrowing allows the government to create more goods, such as infrastructure. Borrowing is not necessarily bad. Borrowing, however, has the disadvantage of adding to the national debt. A word or two on the national debt. The national debt is all the money that the federal government owes to its bondholders. Borrowing to cover budget deficits causes the national debt to grow. The stability of the U.S. government allows it to borrow at a lower interest rate than other nations, allowing it to borrow less, controlling the debt. Basically, the U.S. Is a very stable democracy with a well-established economy, so our bonds are rated very highly compared to other countries. And it's important when we discuss the national debt to differentiate between the deficit and the debt. The deficit is the amount of money that the government borrows for one budget, while the debt is the sum of all government borrowing minus repayments. The national debt is very large, and it's measured in trillions of dollars. A useful way to measure the national debt is as a percentage of GDP, or gross domestic product. During wartime, debt usually rises as a percentage of GDP because the government increases spending faster than it does taxation. In peacetime, however, the debt as a percentage of GDP falls. The U.S. economy broke with this trend during the Reagan administration of the 1980s with tax cuts and increased spending. There was a great deal of military spending during the 1980s. Here's an example of the national debt as a percentage of gross domestic product through the various administrations. Okay, it was on its way down from Truman through Carter. However, during the Reagan-Bush tax cut period, it went up, began to go down through Clinton, and between the Bush and Obama administrations, it has been going up. There are various perspectives or schools of thought on the national debt and how we should handle it. Different viewpoints exist among different economists regarding the impact of the debt. Some of the economists point to problems that are created by the debt, such as the crowding out effect, and this is the loss of funds for private investment due to government borrowing. So in other words, a good portion of the government a good portion of the economy is involved in the public sector, and it creates a lack of opportunities for investment by the private sector. This can hurt investment and slow growth of the economy. And servicing the debt. The government must pay interest on the debt, just as you must pay interest on a car loan that you take out. And these interest payments are becoming very large. And there's an opportunity cost for the government in that this money cannot be used for defense, healthcare, infrastructure, or other government projects. So we must watch the service on the debt. Is the interest on the debt reaching a level where we are losing out as an economy because we are paying too much on it, because the debt's too large? Keynesian economists believe that helping the economy to achieve its full productive capacity is more important than the debt. And the benefits of full productive capacity outweigh the costs of interest on the national debt. The debt, nevertheless, must be managed, however, as large deficits will eventually outweigh the benefits they produce. So, responsible management of the debt, many economists believe, is the key to making sure the economy continues to function. Okay, a little bit of history regarding the national debt. During the 1980s and early 1990s, large annual budget deficits contributed to a large national debt. And in the mid-1980s, Congress passed the Gramm-Rudman-Hollings Act, which created automatic across-the-board cuts in federal spending if the deficit reached a certain amount. The Supreme Court, however, ruled a large portion of the act unconstitutional. And in 1990, Congress attempted to fix the act, but political pressure to exempt many entitlement programs made the law ineffective. The problem with an automatic cut across the board, if the deficit gets too large, is it takes flexibility away from our political leaders to handle an emergency situation. President George H.W. Bush and congressional leaders replaced Gramm-Rudman-Hollings with a pay-as-you-go system that required Congress to raise enough revenue to cover increases in direct spending. In 1995, a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution passed the House but failed the Senate by one vote. Opponents argued that the amendment would not allow the government to have enough flexibility to deal with rapid changes in the economy. By the late 1990s, the federal government announced that the government had a surplus for the first time in 30 years. The new budget procedures begun under G.H.W. Bush began to work, and tax increases under President Clinton in 1993 generated more revenue. So a strong economy and low unemployment followed, and that meant that there were higher incomes that generated more taxes, more tax revenue. By 2001, an economic slowdown and the 9/11 terrorist attacks caused a severe economic slowdown overall in the economy. The government returned to deficit spending as national security and economic growth became a priority. In 2003, President George W. Bush lowered taxes and generated a $400 billion deficit. And something that we need to consider is that with the retirement of the baby boomers, that is, people born between 1946 and 1964, the deficit is predicted to continue to grow, as all of these people will be going on to Social Security and Medicare. That concludes our discussion on budget deficits and the national debt. Thank you for viewing, and I look forward to seeing you in the live lesson. Have a great day.